underway. As of last week, we had delivered close to 1 million doses total to the provinces and territories. There's still a lot of work to do, but these shipments are already bringing relief and hope to communities across the country. Every day, more vulnerable people in long-term care homes and more healthcare workers are getting vaccinated. And in Indigenous and Northern communities too, the immunization campaign is ongoing. Last week on Vancouver Island, 600 doses arrived for the Cowichan tribes. Within just 2 days, every single one had been administered. Over the weekend, 9 Cree communities in northern Quebec received boxes of doses. And in the coastal Inuit community of Nain, Nunatsiavut, Canadian Rangers were deployed and did great work to support the vaccination efforts. This is what teamwork looks like. To everyone who's part of this effort, thank you. When we work towards a common goal, we get results for all Canadians. Now, even with this good news, the situation is still critical. Our fight is not over. That's why we have the plan Canada needs to get you and your family vaccinated as soon as possible and to deal with any roadblocks that come up in our way. For example, Pfizer's global supply issues are not ideal, but that's why we were so ambitious in the large numbers of contracts we signed and doses we secured. I can tell you that Minister Anand is in contact with the company every day. Remember, this situation with the Pfizer delay is temporary. Our vaccination objectives for the first quarter of the year, January to March, are not changing. The total number of doses committed to us is still the same, with every Canadian who wants to get vaccinated able to get vaccinated by September. Quand je dis que tout le monde doit faire sa part,
when I say that everyone has to do their part, I'm also talking to travelers. It's not the time to be traveling abroad. If you had planned to leave the country, please, on behalf of all Canadians, cancel your trip. It's not worth catching COVID-19 and bringing it back to Canada for a trip down south or elsewhere. As you know, travelers must quarantine upon their return, and the consequences are very severe for those who do not follow the rules. As to this new variant of the virus, whether in England, South Africa, or Brazil, we are closely following the situation. But one thing is certain. With these new mutations, circumstances could change very quickly.
On demande aux Canadiens de...
So once again, we're asking Canadians to stay in the country, especially since, as daily, we are reviewing the new issues, and we could impose new restrictions without advance notice at any time. More than ever before, during this pandemic, your behavior has consequences for others. Continue to be vigilant. We must continue to help one another. When we don't follow the rules, healthcare workers and the most vulnerable members of our population are at risk. Remember, this is a temporary situation. Vaccines are being deployed. Let's stay strong for the next few months, because just like you, I'm really looking forward to spring.
Critical that everyone keeps doing their part to slow the spread of COVID-19. We owe it to ourselves, to our families, and to everyone around us. Vaccines are coming. In a few months, spring will be here. So now is not the time to abandon our efforts. I think of the tragic and unacceptable situation in long-term care facilities in Ontario and across the country. Our parents and grandparents deserve better. Our nurses deserve better. So to the residents, we are doing everything we can to get you your vaccine as quickly as possible. And to the workers, I know your families are worried as you are worried about them. I know that your kids are afraid to lose you every time you go to work, and you're afraid of bringing home the virus. So if you haven't already received it, we're getting you your vaccine as soon as possible. So thank you for everything that you do. Your dedication, your commitment to Canadians impresses us all. There's a lot more work to be done, but we're making important progress. Last Friday, Mayor Watson here in Ottawa said that all long-term care homes in the city have finished their first round of vaccination. In Quebec, 3/4 of long-term care home residents have had their first shot. More doses are coming, and we won't stop until everyone is safe. Alors que des mesures plus strictes pour freiner le virus.
While stricter measures have been announced by several provinces over the last few weeks, many people continue to fear for their jobs and their future. Our government has implemented measures to help you, and we are here to help you as long as need be. During the cabinet retreat, the team reviewed our strategy to continue to support families, workers, and businesses in order to get the overall economic picture. We received presentations from two experts, Kevin Milligan from UBC and Francis Donald from Manulife. We also who talked to us about the recovery.
Global crisis. We want to make sure that everyone, every worker, parent, and young person lands back on their feet. To help do that, part of our strategy is ensuring that Canada becomes the global clean tech leader and that Canadian workers be at the forefront of that vision. On that note, it's great to see that Unifor members ratified their agreement with GM Canada to build battery electric commercial vans here in Canada. Including this agreement, deals that have been announced over the past few months have secured nearly $6 billion of investments in the Canadian automotive sector. These deals are protecting and creating good middle-class jobs, and they're creating new opportunities right across the country. With these investments, Canadian automotive workers and businesses will continue to lead in growing markets for efficient, electrified, and smart vehicles. Like we said when we presented our climate plan, a healthy environment and a healthy economy, clean technology presents enormous opportunities for economic growth and jobs. When a project is good for workers, for growing the middle class, and for protecting the environment, everybody wins. There's still a lot of work to be done to rebuild a stronger, cleaner, and more inclusive economy, and announcements like these are exactly what we need to get there. Before we end today, I'd like to say a few words about this week's inauguration in the United States. Tomorrow, Canadians and people around the world will be watching the swearing in of President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. This moment will mark a new chapter in the incredible relationship between our two countries. I also want to address reports surrounding the Keystone XL project. Yesterday, I spoke with our ambassador, Kirsten Hillman. We've had a clear and consistent position supporting this project for years. Our government is making sure that Canada's views are heard and considered by the incoming administration at the highest levels. And of course, I'm really looking forward to working closely with the new president and his team to create jobs and build back better for us all. Merci tout le monde.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll begin question period over the phone. Operator?
Thank you. Merci. Première question, Catherine Nevers, Presse canadienne.
First question, Canadian Press. Yes. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. You just said that your government could impose new restrictions upon travelers without advance notice. I'd like to know which measures you mean specifically. What is it that you're considering? Answer. As I said, we are closely watching the situation, especially the mutations that we see here and there across the world. We want to do everything we can to protect Canadians here in the country. That is why we strongly recommend that no one take non-essential trips. And we continue to have some of the strictest measures in the world when it comes to quarantining and tracing when people before and after people travel to ensure that Canadians are properly protected. But also, of course, we keep a close eye on the situation and will make further decisions if necessary. Supplementary question, Catherine? question. Yes, I'm just trying to understand what your message is today. Is it a warning? Is it a threat to travelers? Are you telling them, come back now? Because we may be imposing further measures without advance notice. Answer, I think that what people saw when we imposed measures around Christmas, when it comes to having to provide a negative test before returning to Canada, we are always prepared to add additional measures. We recognize that the Constitution allows people to travel, but at the same time, we have the obligation and the right to impose very strict measures and strict penalties for those who are endangering Canadians' health. So with our quarantine measures, with our tracing measures, and with our recommendations to avoid travel, we hope that we can continue to protect many Canadians and to protect Canadians well. But if need be, we will impose further measures.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Émilie Bergeron.
Next question, Émilie Bergeron, Agence Q. Hello, Mr. Trudeau. You said this morning that you wanted to ensure that Canada's positions were taken into account by the Biden administration. Have you already spoken to Mr. Biden to try to dissuade him from canceling the pipeline? Answer, as you know, I've been supporting this Keystone XL project for years. I made this argument 7 years ago in a room full of Democrats in Washington, even before I became Prime Minister. I did speak to this project directly to President Biden, showing that and demonstrating that the situation had changed a good deal since he was Vice President when we had Prime Minister Harper. We are speaking with the highest levels of the incoming administration to promote our arguments in support of this project once again. And I trust that we will be heard, that our arguments will be considered during their process.
I have been very clear over the past 7 years that I support the Keystone XL project. We have made that case, including in front of a room filled with Democrats 7 years ago in Washington, D.C., before I became Prime Minister. We have highlighted, including in a direct conversation I had with President-elect Biden a number of weeks ago, that Canada has, in the intervening few years, become a global leader on the fight against climate change and moving forward on transforming our economy in positive ways to reduce carbon emissions, and that Keystone XL continues to be an important project for us. Over the past number of days and continuing today, we are communicating our arguments in favor of Keystone XL directly to the highest levels of this administration, and we will continue to work closely with them on this and many other initiatives to protect jobs and grow the economy in ways that also fight climate change.
Question, Émilie?
Follow-up question, Émilie? Yes. Are you considering legal means to, such as those suggested by Premier Jason Kenney of Alberta? I'd also like to hear about Pfizer. The European Union apparently will only be affected for 1 week, where in terms of the Pfizer delays, whereas here in Canada, it's 4 weeks delay. What do you have to say about that? Answer, well, I plan to speak with Premier Kennedy later today to understand his perspective and his position fully. When it comes to Pfizer, we clearly saw that we will be able, that we will ensure that the contract, that they abide by their contract and that we receive all the promised doses in the first quarter of 2021, and that we will continue to be there and vaccinate the greatest number of Canadians as quickly as possible. Obviously, with this new production of vaccines across the world, we did expect there to be certain challenges for some of the companies, which is why we ensured we had a plan by signing contracts with a large number of vaccine producers so that we could have more doses per resident than any other country does. And Minister Anand continues to speak with Pfizer representatives every day to ensure that Canada will continue to receive the doses we need so badly.
We always knew that in manufacturing global vaccines at the scale that is going to be needed to end this pandemic, there were going to be challenges for certain companies in certain situations, which is one of the reasons why we took extra care to sign more contracts with more potential vaccine makers than most of our allies, and indeed have secured more doses per person than any other country, because we knew there would be challenges. But even with the announced delays by Pfizer, we are confident we're remaining on track to receive all the promised doses we had signed for by the end of Q1, and indeed that all Canadians will be able to be vaccinated by September 2021.
Thank you. Operator, one last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Ryan Tumulty, National Post. Line open.
Yeah, good morning, sir. I wanted to ask you about the vaccine rollout, and specifically, I guess, it seems like the flaw in the strategy so far is the relatively few doses Canada is getting in Q1. I know it's set to scale up after that, but can you explain why Canada is getting so few doses in Q1? Was this all that was available? Were we not willing to meet prices that the drug manufacturers set? What was the challenge?
The challenge is, as of December 1st, 2020, there were none of these vaccines being produced anywhere in the world for general use. They were all in testing and trials, and the scientific community and scientists around the world, and manufacturers, did Herculean efforts in order to achieve an effective vaccine, actually many different effective vaccines against this pandemic in record time, while ensuring the safety and the efficiency of vaccines for people to use. This was a tremendous undertaking, and well before anyone knew which vaccines would be most effective, Canada made the decision to sign contracts with more potential vaccine makers than most of our allies, and actually secured more doses per capita for Canadians than any other country did for their citizens. Now, we recognize that standing up manufacturing processes take time, and that's why we've ensured to be part of the very first wave of vaccinations of any country around the world, and we continue to receive doses. The Pfizer manufacturing facility in Belgium is retooling to be able to produce even more vaccines for distributing to countries and people who need them. And that is causing a momentary delay in their production. But we have been assured by Pfizer that we will still be able to meet our commitments to Canadians as they will meet their contractual obligations to Canadians. Efforts will ramp up around the world as vaccine production increases around the world, but companies are ramping up production step by step, as is necessarily the case for a brand new series of vaccines.
Following up, Ryan?
Yeah, and sir, we're hearing reports out of Europe that the Pfizer doses are not being delayed for as long or not being reduced as significantly in several European countries as compared to Canada's orders. Can you explain that difference, why we're having a longer reduction and a deeper reduction?
I've understood that there are many different musings and reports and speculations and stories about this country doing this, about that country doing that. I had a lovely conversation with Angela Merkel yesterday morning in which she sort of complained to me that every day she gets it from the German media that they're not doing as well as Canada is. I think a lot of people are comparing sharing stories from country to country and trying to figure out how we can all move quicker. I can assure you that Minister Anand is talking almost daily with Pfizer and the other vaccine companies to ensure that we get as many doses as possible as quickly as possible, and that work will continue. We will not rest. We will not slow down until we get as many Canadians vaccinated as quickly as we possibly can so that we can all get through this pandemic. Okay.
I understand that across the world, people are watching what's happening in this country or that country to try and compare and see if we're all doing the right things. Everyone is working as hard as possible to ensure that they obtain the vaccines as quickly as possible, as many doses as possible, and that's what we're trying to do too. I had a wonderful conversation with Angela Merkel, Germany's chancellor, yesterday. She said that nearly every day she was being criticized by German journalists because she hadn't done as well as Canada. And I assured her that I'm being criticized every day and asked, why haven't we done as well as other countries? This is the situation in which we find ourselves. I can tell you that we are working day and night with constant calls to vaccine producers to ensure that we receive as many doses as possible, as quickly as possible for Canadians, because we all want to get through this pandemic as quickly as possible.
No, I just want to pick up on that. Those reports are suggesting that political pressure has worked. In fact, Israel's president is boasting that he's had 17 calls with the CEO of Pfizer. I know you said that Minister Anand is constantly in contact with them, but what are you doing, if anything, to try and put pressure on these companies to actually respect the contracts we've signed?
The companies are respecting the contracts that we've signed. We will receive the doses that were committed by the end of Q1. We will have Canadians vaccinated, everyone who wants it, by September. These are the things that we've committed to Canadians, and we continue to work every day reaching out to the top levels of vaccine companies, including myself being involved, to ensure that we are getting the doses we need.
Hi, Prime Minister. Tom Parry, CBC. The World Health Organization has an interim report out today, or yesterday, about the global pandemic response. It talks about the WHO being slow to declare a pandemic and countries around the world being slow to respond. I know you've said there'll be a time for Canada to look at the lessons learned from all this, but I'd love to get your response to this report. And also, do you think that Canada and other countries should have been better prepared for this pandemic?
We're, of course, looking very carefully at this interim report and seeing how we can apply those lessons, not just for future challenges, but right now to Canada's pandemic response. Obviously, there are things looking back that we could have, should have done differently. And I think one of the most important things as we move forward is making sure that we learn from this experience for future governments and future administrations. I can tell you that the experience of SARS in 2003 left Canada significantly better off and better prepared than many other countries for dealing with this pandemic. But even then, there were other things that we might have done that we didn't quite do in time. And that's why we're always going to be learning about how to better keep Canadians safe and how to better prepare for eventualities like this in the future.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada. When it comes to travel abroad, we understand that you wish people to avoid traveling at all costs. But now there is a break coming up. Are we going to, during the March break, are we going to try and prevent all Canadians from traveling during March break? Answer, we have a constitution that guarantees the right of freedom of movement to all Canadians. However, I must emphasize that the measures we have implemented are not only there to discourage people from traveling, and with the 2 weeks of mandatory quarantine with severe penalties, as well as tracing before returning back to Canada, and providing a test, and other measures that we've implemented. It's not just to discourage people from traveling. There are also measures that will ensure Canadians are protected. We are always speaking to our provincial counterparts as well as other partners to see if we need to impose further measures, including when we're talking about upcoming break weeks and eventually Canadians who spend the winters down south. And when they begin to return to the country in the spring, we're going to look at everything we can do to ensure Canadians are protected.
Gallagher, CTV National News. Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole has said that he'd like to kick Derek Sloan out of Conservative caucus. They're going to have to decide about that for Mr. Sloan accepting donations from Paul Frum, self-described white nationalist. But Mr. Frum's organization has also reportedly received money for the Canadian wage subsidy. So my broader question is, what can be done here for the government and for political organizations like the Liberal Party to avoid from infiltration of far-right groups that may be trying to get into the Canadian political sphere and use public money in some way as well?
I think, Kevin, you're combining a number of different things. First of all, political parties need to remain vigilant, particularly in the wake of what we've seen in the United States from the infiltration or the active presence of fringe or extremist or violent or unacceptable or intolerant elements. And that's something that we constantly need to work towards as all politicians in Canada, which is incidentally why the Liberal Party has been calling for Aaron O'Toole to remove Derek Sloan from caucus for many, many months now, following a number of unacceptable comments that he has made. We are pleased that Aaron O'Toole has finally decided to take leadership, and we'll see how that unfolds. In regards to the wage subsidy, we knew we had to move quickly to support workers in jobs right across the country. And obviously, that meant sending help immediately to families and to individuals when this pandemic hit back in March, so that people could keep food on the table, could continue to pay their rent, regardless of the job or the organization they worked for. Obviously, that requires checking after the fact, and there is a lot of work ongoing with the Canada Revenue Agency and others to ensure that the companies that received and the workers that received these benefits actually needed them and actually qualified for them. And of course, anyone who is found to be breaking the law as a corporation or as an organization will face severe penalties.
Stephen Chase with the Globe and Mail. Good morning, Prime Minister. At least 3 publicly traded Canadian companies, Canadian resource companies, have active projects and plans in China's Xinjiang region, where a large number of Muslims are locked up in concentration and labor camps. These are Canadian Solar Incorporated, Dynasty Gold Corporation, and Gobi Min Incorporated. Can you assure Canadians that these companies are not using forced labor and are not contributing to human rights abuses of Chinese Muslim minority? And has the government taken any steps to speak to these companies?
We have been increasingly concerned over the past many years on the treatment of the Uyghur minority in Western China. We have highlighted that many times directly, both in global multilateral forums and directly with the Chinese government in meetings and conversations that I've had over the past years with their leadership. Over the past number of days, we've announced further measures around restrictions on benefiting from labor used in the region that may be forced labor by the Uyghurs. We are working with Canadian companies, all Canadian companies, to ensure that they are not benefiting from or profiting from these human rights abuses. We will continue to work very, very closely and follow up with the companies you named and all companies who have investments in that area to ensure that they are following Canadian values and Canadian law.
Hello, Prime Minister. Mike Blanchfield, Canadian Press. Can you give us a bit more detail? You've told us what you've done on Keystone in the past. What do you plan to do tomorrow after Biden is inaugurated? I mean, are you going to call him directly? Are you going to try to persuade him to delay this action? Would you support legal action by the Alberta government if it comes to that? Can you give us some specifics about what's next on Keystone for you?
Like I've said, I've been very, very clear on my support for this project for the past 7 years. I have continued to work with American officials and members of various administrations on promoting and demonstrating the importance of this project from a jobs perspective, but also from an energy security perspective. I brought up this issue in my very first conversation with President-elect Biden before Christmas. Our officials in Washington have continued to make the case for Keystone XL. We understand, of course, that it is a commitment that the administration made many months ago, or the candidate, Joe Biden, made to cancel this pipeline. At the same time, we continue to demonstrate the leadership that Canada has shown on fighting climate change and on ensuring energy security as a priority for North America. We're going to continue to make that case, and I look forward to speaking with Biden, with President Biden, in the coming days to talk about this and many other issues that we will work on together as we build back better and as we fight COVID-19.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Thank you very much. This brings today's press conference to a close. Thank you, everyone.